Eleanor Whitmore pressed her hands flat against her thighs to stop them from shaking. She was 24 years old, plain as river clay, and standing at the door of the most powerful man in Virginia, sent there not because anyone believed in her, but because her beautiful sister had run away and left the family drowning in shame. She hadn't been chosen, she'd been offered up. If this story moves something in your chest, subscribe to our channel, follow every part until the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Eleanor Whitmore was sent to Caldwell Manor, the heat sat over Virginia like a punishment. It was the summer of 1816, and the land was bright and cruel and indifferent, the way land often is when human lives are falling apart. The tobacco fields along the road shimmered. The dirt lane leading away from Whitmore House was dry and cracked. And Eleanor sat inside a hired coach that smelled of old leather and someone else's sweat, her hands pressed flat against her knees, her spine straight, her face arranged into something she hoped looked like calm. She was not calm. She was terrified. But Eleanor Grace Whitmore had learned early in life that nobody came to save a plain girl who was crying. So she had stopped crying at things that couldn't be changed. She saved her tears for things that deserved them. And this morning, she decided did not deserve them. Her sister had made the mess. Eleanor was just being sent to stand in it. 3 days earlier, the Whitmore household had been different. 3 days earlier, there had still been hope. Victoria Rose Whitmore, 22 years old, golden-haired, the kind of beautiful that made men forget their own names, had been engaged to Nathaniel Hawthorne Caldwell, the richest man in 3 counties, the most feared landowner in all of Virginia. A man with more acres than most men had ambitions, and a reputation so cold and precise that people lowered their voices when they spoke about him, even in their own parlors. The engagement had been arranged 6 months prior, when the Whitmore family's finances had quietly begun to collapse. Edward Whitmore, Eleanor's father, had made a series of poor investments. Loans had been called in. The tobacco crop had failed 2 seasons running. Caldwell had offered to absorb the Whitmore debts, restructure their holdings, and in exchange a marriage. His name and his money given freely in exchange for a wife from a respectable family. Victoria had been the obvious choice. She was beautiful. She was charming. She moved through a room the way sunlight moved through glass, bright, warm, scattering into every corner. People watched her. People wanted her. Nobody watched Eleanor. Eleanor was the other one, the quiet one, the one who kept the household accounts when their father couldn't face the ledgers. The one who managed the servants and corresponded with the merchants and knew, always, exactly how much flour was left in the pantry and exactly how many days it would last. She was useful the way a good pair of boots was useful, essential, taken for granted, and rarely admired. She had accepted this a long time ago, or she had told herself she'd accepted it, which is a different thing entirely. The night Victoria disappeared, Eleanor had been in the back study, going over the accounts by candlelight. She heard the commotion first, voices her mother's high and sharp, her father's low and disbelieving. A door slamming. Then her mother's voice again, climbing toward something that was either rage or grief, and Eleanor had set down her pen and gone to find out what had happened. What had happened was this. Victoria had left a note. The note said, in Victoria's lupin, pretty handwriting, that she was sorry, that she loved them, and that she simply could not marry a man she did not love. She had met someone, a painter from Philadelphia. His name was Emile. He was talented and passionate and had eyes the color of summer sky, and she was certain, absolutely certain, that he was her destiny. She was gone. They were gone together north, presumably. Somewhere that wasn't Virginia, somewhere her family's shame couldn't reach her. Eleanor read the note twice. Then she set it on the table and looked at her father. Edward Whitmore looked like a man who had just been told the ground under his feet was not solid after all. He was 53 years old, soft around the middle, with kind eyes that had never been quite unkind enough to serve him well in business. He was not a bad man. He was a weak one. There's a difference, though it doesn't always feel like it to the people who depend on them. "She's gone," he said, as if Eleanor hadn't just read the note herself. "She's gone," Eleanor confirmed. "Caldwell." Her father said the name the way a man says the word sinkhole, with dread and the knowledge that he is already falling. "Caldwell is going to call in every debt," Eleanor said. Yes. Her mother, Margaret Whitmore, had appeared in the doorway. She was a handsome woman who had once been beautiful, who wore her faded prettiness like armor, and had spent 25 years believing that beauty was the only currency a woman truly owned. She looked at Eleanor now with an expression. Eleanor had learned to read long ago, the expression that said, "This is a problem, and you are the only one who can solve it." "Someone has to go to him," her mother said. "I'll write a letter," her father said. Her mother's voice was flat. "Edward, he is owed a bride. He is owed an explanation. A letter is what you send when you cancel a supper engagement." "Then what do you propose?" The silence that followed was brief. But Eleanor felt it the way you feel a cold draft through a cracked window, unmistakable, deliberate, aimed directly at you. "Eleanor," her mother said. Eleanor looked at her. "You'll go." There was no discussion. Or rather, there was the kind of discussion that happens when an outcome has already been decided, and the talking is just performance, a thing people do so they can say later that they considered alternatives. Eleanor sat in the parlor and listened to her parents talk around her as if she were furniture. Her father said it wasn't fair to put Eleanor in such a position. Her mother said fairness was a luxury they could no longer afford. Her father said Eleanor wasn't the one who had made promises to Caldwell. Her mother said Eleanor was the one who was here, and here was what mattered. Her father said Caldwell might not even agree to see her. Her mother said Caldwell would see whoever came to his door, because Caldwell was a man who faced things directly, and that was more than could be said for the rest of them. Then her father went quiet, and Eleanor understood that the conversation was over. She walked to the window. She looked out at the long drive, at the fields, at the heat shimmering off the red Virginia clay. She thought about Victoria laughing somewhere with her painter, probably. She thought about her father's debts. She thought about what it meant to be the daughter nobody worried about because she had never given anyone reason to worry. "You're dependable, Eleanor," people said. "You're so steady, Eleanor." "What would we do without you, Eleanor?" What they meant was, "We don't have to think about you. You'll manage," and she always had. "Fine," Eleanor said, still looking out the window. "I'll go." Her mother exhaled with relief. Her father said, "You're a good girl, Eleanor." Eleanor did not answer. She had decided somewhere, between reading her sister's note and hearing her own name said in that particular tone, that particular mixture of relief and slight guilt, that she was done being a good girl, in the way they meant it. She would go to Caldwell Manor. She would face Nathaniel Caldwell. But she would not grovel. She would not perform sorrow she did not feel. She would not pretend that Victoria had been an innocent party, or that the Whitmore family deserved mercy they hadn't earned. She would simply tell the truth. It was, she thought, the least and the most she could do. Caldwell Manor appeared at the end of a long straight drive lined with oaks so old their branches touched overhead and made a kind of tunnel, shade dark and cathedral quiet. The coach rolled through slowly. Eleanor looked out the window without letting herself grip the doorframe, though her fingers wanted to. The house itself was large and white and severe. Not beautiful in the way of houses built to impress it, was beautiful in the way of things built to last. Every line was intentional. Every proportion was considered. It was a house that said, without particular warmth, "I have been here a long time, and I will be here long after you are gone." She had heard stories about Caldwell Manor all her life. Everyone in the county had. She had heard that Nathaniel Caldwell dismissed 3 overseers in a single season because their accounts didn't balance. She had heard that he'd once walked out of a business negotiation because the man across the table had been dishonest, and that he had refused to do business with that man's family for 11 years afterward. She had heard he was cold, methodical, fair in a way that had no softness in it. She had heard from a woman at a church social last spring that his eyes were the color of iron and just as hard. Eleanor had not paid much attention to that last detail. She had more practical things to think about. The coach stopped. A man in a dark coat helped her down the step. He did not look at her with curiosity or judgment. He looked at her the way trained household staff looked at unexpected guests with careful neutrality, giving nothing away. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Yes," she said. "I believe Mr. Caldwell is expecting." "This way, ma'am." She was shown to a study, not a sitting room. Not a parlor. Not the kind of comfortable, neutral space where you put guests you're trying to make feel welcome. A study. A desk broad enough to sleep on. Maps pinned to a board. Ledgers stacked with the careful order of a man who believed that disorder was a form of dishonesty. Eleanor walked in and stood near the window. She did not sit. She had not been invited to sit. She waited. She did not wait long. Nathaniel Caldwell walked into the room, and Eleanor's first thought was that the stories had been accurate, which was unusual. Stories rarely were. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, broad through the shoulders in the way of a man who worked his own land alongside his workers rather than simply directing them. His hair was dark brown, pushed back from a face that was not handsome exactly. Or not handsome in the soft, careful way that Victoria would have called handsome. But it was a face you didn't forget, strong jaw, a mouth set in a way that suggested it had learned not to make promises it wasn't prepared to keep. And eyes that were, in fact, gray, a particular shade of gray that wasn't quite warm and wasn't quite cold, but was instead watchful. Intelligent. He stopped inside the door. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said, "You're not Victoria Whitmore." "No," Eleanor said. "Her sister." A pause. "Your father sent a sister in his place." "My father sent no one," Eleanor said. "I came on my own." That was not entirely true, but it was true enough in the ways that mattered. Caldwell moved to his desk. He did not sit either. He stood behind it, one hand resting on the surface, and studied her with that watchful gray gaze. "Then why are you here, Miss Whitmore?" Eleanor took a breath. "Because someone should tell you the truth," she said. And it didn't seem like anyone else was going to. The silence that followed was the kind that had texture to it. Eleanor had expected anger. She had prepared herself for anger, for the cold, controlled anger of a powerful man who had been publicly humiliated and was owed an accounting. She had prepared a quiet, steady response to that anger. She had practiced it in the coach silently, her lips moving slightly while the Virginia countryside scrolled past the window. What she had not prepared for was the quality of his attention. He was watching her the way you watch something that has surprised you, not with the dismissiveness she was accustomed to, not with the vague, unfocused gaze men tended to give her when Victoria was in the room. He was watching her the way a man watches something he hasn't quite categorized yet. It was, she realized, deeply uncomfortable. "The truth," he repeated. "Yes, and what is the truth, Miss Whitmore?" Eleanor squared her shoulders. "My sister left of her own choosing. She wasn't coerced or frightened into it. She met a man she preferred, and she went with him, and she knew exactly what she was doing to your agreement with our family when she made that choice. My father is sorry, my mother is mortified." She paused. "Just briefly, I am here to tell you that the Whitmore family has no excuses to offer. Only an acknowledgement that we have wronged you." Caldwell said nothing. "We cannot give you back what Victoria took from you," Eleanor continued. "Your time, your planning, the arrangements you made in good faith. None of that can be returned, and pretending otherwise would be an insult to your intelligence." Another pause. "What do you propose instead?" he asked. "Nothing," Eleanor said. "I'm not here to propose anything. I'm here to look you in the eye and tell you the truth. What you do with that is your business." Something shifted in his face. It was small, almost imperceptible. The faintest movement around his eyes, a loosening of the set around his jaw. If Eleanor hadn't been watching him as carefully as he was watching her, she would have missed it entirely. "Most people," Caldwell said slowly, "who come to this house after doing wrong come with proposals. Repayment plans. Promises." "I know," Eleanor said. "You came with none of those things." "No, why?" She considered the question. She thought she knew the answer, but she wanted to make sure she said it correctly, not because she was afraid of saying the wrong thing, but because she had a strong dislike of imprecision. Because promises made in this kind of situation are usually lies, she said finally. And justifications are usually performances. I don't see the point in performing for you, Mr. Caldwell. You seem like a man who'd find it more irritating than comforting. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Sit down, Miss Whitmore." Eleanor sat. They talked for a long time. Not about Victoria. Not about the scandal or the debts or the formal engagement that had been dissolved without ceremony the moment the note was found. They talked about the Whitmore accounts because Caldwell asked, and because Eleanor knew every figure in those accounts by heart, could recite them the way another woman might recite scripture or poetry. He asked questions, sharp, precise questions. Questions that assumed competence rather than pandering to the possibility of its absence. She answered them, directly, without hedging. He asked her who managed the Whitmore household accounts. She said she did. He asked since when. She said since she was 16, when it became apparent her father's method of management involved a good deal of optimism and very little arithmetic. Something moved through his expression, again, not quite amusement but adjacent to it. He asked her what she thought could be done about the Whitmore family's current financial situation. She told him. She had thought about this too in the coach. She had calculations. She had a general outline of where savings could be found, which debts were most urgent, which creditors might be willing to renegotiate terms. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You've thought about this seriously." "I've thought about little else for the past 2 years," Eleanor said. Worry has a way of producing very thorough analysis. This time there was no question about the expression on his face. He almost smiled. It lasted only a moment, but Eleanor noticed it. She filed it away in the part of her mind that collected things worth noticing. It was late afternoon when he finally said what she had not expected him to say. The light had moved. The room had gone from bright and direct to something softer, gold-edged. Eleanor had long since stopped registering the heat, though she could feel the dampness at the back of her neck, the slight heaviness of her dress in the summer air. "I still need a wife," Caldwell said. Eleanor looked at him. "The reasons that made the arrangement with your family sensible have not changed," he continued. He was not looking at her with any particular emotion. He was looking at her the way he had looked at the maps on his wall, with assessment, with calculation, with the specific attention of a man who was deciding whether something was what he needed it to be. "I require someone to manage this household. Someone I can trust with correspondence and accounts. Someone who won't misrepresent our situation to creditors or neighbors or people who wish to do business with me." Eleanor said nothing. "Your sister was selected," Caldwell said, "because she was beautiful and her family had a respectable name. I was willing to work with a woman I didn't know, because I believed she was at least honest." "She wasn't," Eleanor said. A pause. "But you are." The word landed in the room with more weight than Eleanor had expected. She sat very still. "What are you saying, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked, though she was beginning to understand. "I'm saying that I need a wife," he said, "and you need your family's financial situation resolved. I'm saying that you have demonstrated, in the past several hours, a degree of honesty and capability that I had not anticipated finding in this meeting. And I'm saying," he paused here, briefly, and looked at her with that watchful gray gaze, "that if you're willing, I would consider extending the original arrangement." "To you." Silence. Eleanor heard the clock on the mantelpiece. The distant sound of someone working in the yard. The slow creak of the house in the summer heat. She said, "You're asking me to marry you." "I'm proposing a practical arrangement," he said. "Yes." Eleanor stood up. She walked to the window. She looked out at the last of the afternoon light, and thought about her mother's face that morning, the relief in it. Yes, but also the calculation. She thought about her father, who would have sent her to much worse places than this, if it had resolved his debts. She thought about Victoria, who had chosen herself without once considering what that choice would cost her sister. She thought about what it meant to be chosen by default. She thought about what it meant to be chosen at all. Then she turned around. "I have conditions," she said. Caldwell's eyes moved to her face. His expression shifted not with irritation, but with something that looked, again, almost like interest. "State them," he said. "My family's debts are settled," Eleanor said. "But the settlement is not contingent on my behavior as your wife. It is a separate matter. They are made solvent because it is the right resolution to what Victoria did not, because I have performed to your satisfaction." Agreed paused. She had expected to argue that one. "Second," she said, "I manage this household's accounts. Not an overseer you appoint. Me. I want access to every ledger, every contract, every correspondence that touches the finances of this property." Caldwell looked at her steadily. "You think I'd refuse that?" "I don't know what you'd refuse," she said. "That's why I'm stating it plainly." "Agreed," he said again. Third. She met his eyes directly. "You do not make decisions that affect my life without consulting me. I don't mean you require my permission for everything. I mean you talk to me as someone whose opinion holds weight. Not as someone you've accommodated." The room went quiet. Caldwell looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Miss Whitmore, those are the most reasonable terms I have been offered in any arrangement in the past decade." Eleanor said, "Then you won't have any trouble agreeing to them." "I don't," he said. "I agree." Eleanor looked at him. He looked at her. "Then yes," she said. "I will marry you, Mr. Caldwell." She was back in the coach before dark. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched the oaks slide past the window, their branches blocking out the last of the evening sky, and she let herself feel carefully, precisely what had just happened. She had gone to Caldwell Manor to apologize for her sister's choices. She was returning engaged to the man her sister had abandoned. The coach hit a rut in the road. Eleanor grabbed the doorframe purely instinct and then let go. She thought, "I could be frightened by this." She thought, "I could be relieved." She thought, "I could be anything, right now, and no one is watching. It doesn't matter which thing I choose." What she chose finally was something that didn't quite have a name. Something that sat between wariness and determination. A thing that felt like standing at the edge of a river in the dark and knowing the current was strong, and stepping in anyway, because standing on the bank until morning wasn't actually safer, it was just slower. She had told him the truth. He had listened. He had looked at her, not past her, not around her, not at the space where a prettier woman might have stood. At her. She didn't know what that meant yet. She didn't know what kind of man he was, underneath the watchfulness, underneath the precision, underneath the quiet authority of a man who had built something real and intended to protect it. But she thought carefully, without letting herself feel more than what the evidence supported. She thought he might be the kind of man who could be known. And Eleanor Whitmore, who had spent 24 years being overlooked in her own home, thought that was worth finding out. When the coach pulled up to Whitmore House, her mother was on the steps. Margaret Whitmore looked at her daughter's face and said, "Well?" "The debts will be settled," Eleanor said, climbing down. Her mother exhaled. He agreed to a new arrangement. He did. A pause. Her mother searched her face with that particular parental calculation, reading not just what was said but what the saying had cost. "And you?" her mother said. "I'm fine," Eleanor said. "Eleanor," her mother's voice caught slightly, just slightly. "Are you certain?" Eleanor looked at her mother. She thought about saying many things. She thought about saying, "You sent me there without asking if I wanted to go. You looked at me and saw a solution, and you sent me." She thought about saying, "I am not fine in the way you want me to be fine. But I am fine in the way that matters." She thought about saying, "I negotiated my own terms. I stood in that room and I told the truth, and I asked for what I needed, and he agreed. All of it. I walked in there as the daughter nobody worried about, and I walked out with something of my own." She said none of these things. She said, "I'm certain." Then she walked inside. In the back study, her father's account books were still spread across the desk. The candle she'd left burning the night Victoria disappeared had guttered down to almost nothing, a waxy stub in a brass holder, still faintly smoking. Eleanor sat down at the desk. She picked up her pen. She opened a new page in the ledger, wrote the date across the top, and began to add up what everything was going to cost. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. But for the first time in a long time, the work felt like it was hers. Eleanor Whitmore arrived at Caldwell Manor for the second time in her life, 3 weeks after the first, and this time she arrived with 2 trunks, a household ledger, and no illusions whatsoever. The wedding had been small, deliberately so, a country minister. A parlor. Her father standing beside her with the particular expression of a man who knows he owes a debt he cannot repay. Her mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, whether from guilt or relief or some complicated mixture of the two. Eleanor had decided not to examine too closely. Nathaniel Caldwell had stood at the front of the Whitmore parlor in a dark coat and said his vows in the same tone he might use to sign a contract. Precise, unhurried, absolutely certain of every word. Eleanor had said hers the same way. There had been no kiss. He had taken her hand briefly, formally, and then let it go. She had not minded. She had not expected tenderness, and she did not want it, not yet, not from a man she had known for 3 weeks and spoken to honestly for perhaps 4 hours total. What she wanted was a chance to prove herself useful. What she wanted was the ledgers. The ledgers came first. Mrs. Holt, the Caldwell housekeeper, was a woman of approximately 60 who wore her gray hair pinned so severely it appeared to be pulling her face upward, and who regarded Eleanor's arrival with the kind of careful neutrality that told Eleanor everything she needed to know about the woman's intelligence. Mrs. Holt was not hostile. She was not warm. She was watching, measuring, deciding. Eleanor respected that enormously. "Mr. Caldwell said you'd want to see the household accounts, Mrs. Holt said, on the first morning, standing in the doorway of the small room that had been designated Eleanor's office. He was right, Eleanor said. All of them. Not the summary sheets, the source ledgers. Mrs. Holt's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. The source ledgers have always been kept by Mr. Patterson. The overseer? Yes, ma'am. Where are they kept? A brief pause. In Mr. Patterson's office. Then I'll need them brought here, Eleanor said pleasantly. Today, if possible. Another pause. Long Mr. Patterson has managed these accounts for 7 years, Mrs. Holt said. I'm sure he has, Eleanor said, and I'll be glad to discuss his methods with him once I've had a chance to review what he's built. But I need to see the source ledgers first. That was agreed with Mr. Caldwell before our marriage. Mrs. Holt looked at her for one more moment. Then she said, I'll send word to Mr. Patterson. She left. Eleanor sat down at the desk, opened the window to let in the summer air, and waited. The ledgers did not arrive that morning. They did not arrive that afternoon. By the time Eleanor went down to dinner, a quiet, formal affair in a dining room, large enough to seat 20, but set for 2, she had spent 6 hours reviewing the only documents she'd been given access to: supply invoices, wage records, and a summary sheet that told her precisely nothing useful about where the money was actually going. Caldwell was already seated when she entered. He rose briefly, a reflexive courtesy, automatic and genuine, and they both sat. The first course was served. Eleanor waited until the servant had withdrawn. Then she said, Mr. Patterson hasn't sent the source ledgers. Caldwell looked up from his plate. I asked Mrs. Holt for them this morning, Eleanor continued. She said she'd send word. They haven't arrived. A pause. I'll speak to Patterson. I'd appreciate that, Eleanor said. I'd also like to understand why a man who's been told by his employer that his new wife will be assuming financial oversight of the household has decided to test whether that instruction is serious. Caldwell set down his fork. He looked at her across the table with that gray, watchful gaze, and Eleanor met it directly. She was not angry. She was not performing frustration for effect. She was simply stating an observable fact and asking implicitly what he intended to do about it. You think he's testing me, Caldwell said. I think he's testing the situation, Eleanor said. You may be the employer, but I'm new, and I'm a woman, and he's held those accounts for 7 years. He wants to see if I'm serious. Or more precisely, he wants to see if you're serious about the arrangement you made. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. I am, he said. Then I'd suggest making that clear to him before tomorrow morning, Eleanor said, because the longer it takes for those ledgers to arrive, the more everyone on this property will assume that my role here is ornamental. Caldwell said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You're right." Eleanor picked up her fork. "I usually am about arithmetic," she said mildly. "It's one of my more reliable qualities." This time he did not almost smile. He actually smiled, brief, controlled but real, and looked back at his plate. The ledgers arrived the following morning before breakfast. She spent 4 days going through them. She did not emerge much. She ate at her desk, she slept 6 hours and rose before the household was fully awake. She worked with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had been managing other people's financial disasters for long enough to know exactly where the bodies were typically buried. She found the first discrepancy on day 2. It was small. A supply purchase recorded at a price 12% higher than the going market rate, with no notation explaining the difference. Alone, it meant nothing. These things happened. Merchants raised prices, circumstances changed, errors were made. But Eleanor did not look at individual entries. She looked at patterns. By the afternoon of day 3, she had found 7 similar entries. Different vendors, different categories of expense. All within a narrow range, never large enough to trigger scrutiny, always just slightly above market rate. 7 entries over 14 months, each small enough to dismiss, all adding up to a sum that was not small at all. She sat with that for a long time. Then she went to find Caldwell. He was in the yard, speaking with a worker about the fencing along the eastern field. He turned when he heard her approach, and whatever he saw in her expression made him say a brief word to the worker and walk toward her. "What is it?" "I need to show you something," Eleanor said. "When you have a moment now," he said. They walked together to her office. Eleanor spread the ledger pages across the desk and walked him through it. She did not dramatize. She did not speculate beyond what the numbers supported. She showed him the entries, showed him the market prices she'd cross-referenced, showed him the sum. He stood beside her and looked at the pages for a long time without speaking. 7 entries, he said. "That I can confirm," Eleanor said. "There may be more in earlier years. I've only gone through the past 14 months. Patterson has been here 7 years. Yes, the word sat in the room like something heavy. Caldwell straightened. His expression had closed not with anger exactly, but with the particular stillness of a man who has discovered that something he trusted was not trustworthy, and is now deciding what to do about it. "You're certain," he said. "I'm certain of what the numbers show," Eleanor said carefully. "I'm not certain of the explanation. It could be simple incompetence. Sloppy record-keeping. A vendor relationship that isn't what it appears." She paused. "But if you're asking whether I believe the pattern is accidental, no. I don't." He looked at her. "How long did it take you to find this?" 3 days, 3 days, he repeated. "The pattern wasn't hidden well," Eleanor said. "It was hidden just well enough that someone who trusted the summary sheets wouldn't look deeper. But once you're in the source ledgers," she didn't finish the sentence. The numbers finished it for her. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you recommend?" Eleanor blinked. She had not expected to be asked. She recovered quickly. "Don't confront Patterson directly. Not yet. Let me finish reviewing the earlier records. First, I want to know the full scope before anything is said. If you confront him now with partial information, he'll know exactly what's missing and adjust his story accordingly." Caldwell looked at her steadily. "And when you've finished reviewing them," he said. "Then you confront him," Eleanor said, "with everything." "All at once." Caldwell nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Finish the review." Eleanor turned back to the ledgers. Behind her, she heard him walk to the door, then stop. "Miss Whitmore," he said. She turned. He corrected himself immediately. "Eleanor." Her name in his mouth was strange and unfamiliar. "Not unpleasant, just new." "You've been here 4 days," he said. "Yes." And you already found this. She looked at him. I told you I would, she said simply. He left. Eleanor turned back to her work. She finished the full review in 6 days. The complete picture was worse than the initial estimate. Across 4 years, not 7, because the discrepancies only began after a particular vendor relationship was established. Patters had been systematically overcharging by amounts that totaled, conservatively, just over $800. $800 was not a catastrophic sum for an estate the size of Caldwell Manor. But it was the principle of it. It was the duration. It was the deliberateness. It was 7 years of trust, and 4 of them spent quietly stealing. Eleanor wrote out a full summary, every entry, every cross-reference, every date. She was thorough, and she was merciless, not with emotion, but with accuracy, which is a different kind of merciless and more effective. She brought it to Caldwell after supper on the 6th day. He read it without speaking. When he finished, he set the papers on his desk and looked at her. How do you want to handle the confrontation? Eleanor asked. I'll handle it, he said. I'm asking how. Because the way you do it matters. If he's been here 7 years, he has relationships with every worker on this property. If you dismiss him publicly and badly, you'll spend months managing the aftermath. Caldwell looked at her with that steady gray regard. You've thought this through. It's what I do, Eleanor said. A pause. My inclination is to dismiss him immediately. I know, Eleanor said. But your inclination's also going to cost you 3 weeks of disruption to your harvest operations if half your workers decide to take his side before they know the full story. She paused. Give me 2 days to talk to Mrs. Holt. She knows every relationship on this property. She'll know whose loyalties lie where, and we can plan accordingly. He studied her. You're not suggesting we delay because you're afraid of the confrontation, he said. It was not quite a question. No, Eleanor said clearly. I'm suggesting we delay 2 days, because a confrontation handled badly is worse than a confrontation handled late. 2 days won't change the facts. It might change whether you lose your Eastern Field crew, along with your dishonest overseer. Silence. 2 days, Caldwell said. He nodded. Eleanor picked up her summary sheets, set them neatly on the side of his desk, where they could be found, and went to bed. She slept better than she had since arriving at Caldwell Manor. Mrs. Holt, it turned out, had known something was wrong for approximately 2 years. She said this to Eleanor the following morning, over tea in the kitchen, not the formal parlor, not the dining room. The kitchen, which was where honest conversations happened in houses like this one. Eleanor had suggested it. Mrs. Holt had looked at her with an expression of recalibrated assessment and said, "The kitchen it is." I didn't have numbers, Mrs. Holt said. I had a feeling. The supply deliveries never quite matched the invoices when I tried to account for them myself. But Mr. Patterson had the books, and every time I raised a question, he'd show me a figure that made my question seem wrong. She paused. He's a clever man. He is, Eleanor agreed. But he was counting on nobody checking. Nobody ever had before. Well, Eleanor said, I am. Mrs. Holt looked at her, really looked at her, the kind of looking that has substance behind it. Mrs. Caldwell, she began, then caught herself at the title. I owe you an apology. Eleanor looked up. I wasn't warm when you arrived, Mrs. Holt said. I won't pretend otherwise. I've served in this house for 12 years and I had certain ideas about what was needed here. A pause. I was wrong about what that looked like. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. You were cautious, she said. That's different from wrong. You didn't know me. I was told Mr. Caldwell had married the plain sister, Mrs. Holt said bluntly, the one sent to make things right. You thought I was a decoration chosen out of desperation, Eleanor said. Mrs. Holt's mouth pressed together, yes. So did most people, Eleanor said. I've spent my life being underestimated by people who should have known better. It doesn't surprise me anymore. She looked at the older woman steadily. But I'd like to think we can start from something different. Are you willing? Mrs. Holt studied her. Then she said, what do you need to know about Patterson's relationships? Eleanor smiled, just slightly, everything. The confrontation happened on a Thursday morning. Caldwell called Patterson into the study. Eleanor was already inside, seated at a chair to the side of the desk, not behind it, not beside Caldwell, but positioned clearly and deliberately in the room. Patterson walked in expecting a routine conversation with his employer and stopped when he saw Eleanor. His expression moved through three things in rapid succession: recognition, calculation, a very carefully constructed blankness. Eleanor watched him do all three. She noted the order in which they happened. Patterson was 50-odd years, stocky and weathered, with the handshake and hail-fellow energy of a man who had spent decades making himself liked. He had likely been very good at his job in the early years. He had simply at some point decided that being good at his job wasn't enough. "Mr. Patterson," Caldwell said. His voice was absolutely level. "Sit down." Patterson sat. Caldwell laid the summary on the desk and turned it to face him. "Mrs. Caldwell has been reviewing the household accounts," Caldwell said. "She has some questions she'd like to put to you." Patterson's eyes moved to Eleanor. Eleanor held his gaze. "The vendor account with Haley and Sons," Eleanor said. "The tobacco supply contract, going back to April of 1812. Can you explain why the unit price in your records is consistently 12 to 15% above the county average?" Patterson smiled. The smile of a man who had been asked uncomfortable questions before and had survived them. "Prices fluctuate, ma'am, especially in summer. I've cross-referenced against 3 separate county merchant records for the same periods," Eleanor said calmly. "The county average didn't fluctuate by that margin. Not consistently, not in the same direction every time, across 4 separate vendors." The smile didn't disappear, but something behind it did. "There may have been transport costs not reflected in the minus." "The transport costs are recorded separately," Eleanor said. "On page 4 of the same ledger. I've accounted for them." Silence. Patterson looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked back at him. His expression said nothing, but it said nothing in a way that was impossible to misread. "I may have made some errors," Patterson said carefully. "Record-keeping over that many years, it's possible." "The errors run in one direction," Eleanor said, "every time. For 4 years. Errors that benefit a consistent pattern don't tend to happen by accident." The room was very quiet. Patterson was no longer smiling. He tried a different approach. He turned to Caldwell with the expression of a man appealing to a longer relationship, a shared history, a loyalty built over years. "Nathaniel," he said, deliberate use of the first name. "I've served this estate faithfully for 7 years. Whatever discrepancies whatever Mrs. Caldwell may think she's found, I think we can resolve this between us, without—" "No," Caldwell said, "just that, one word." Patterson stopped. "Mrs. Caldwell's review is thorough," Caldwell said. "I've read it myself. The numbers are accurate and the pattern is what she says it is. I'm not interested in resolving this privately, because there is nothing private about dishonesty." The color left Patterson's face. "You'll be dismissed today," Caldwell said. "The full sum documented in Mrs. Caldwell's report will be deducted from your final wages and your severance. If the amount exceeds what's owed to you, I expect the balance within 30 days. If you contest any of this, I will take it to the county magistrate and make the entire record public." Patterson looked at Eleanor. It was a look she had seen before, not in kind but in structure. The look of a man who has been bested and is searching for somewhere to put his anger that doesn't involve the person who actually has power over him. She met it steadily. She did not flinch. She did not gloat. She simply looked back at him and waited. He stood. He left. The door closed. Eleanor exhaled slowly, carefully so it didn't show too much. "Well done," Caldwell said. She turned to look at him. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, something that had more warmth in it than she'd expected from him. Something that sat adjacent to admiration. "You did the hard part," she said. "I just counted." "You did considerably more than count," he said. Eleanor gathered her papers. "He'll complain to whoever will listen," she said. He'll say I came in and made accusations, and your wife doesn't know this land or these people. Some of the workers will believe him at least at first. I know, Caldwell said. Let them, Eleanor said. The accounts will speak for themselves. And once the Eastern Field crew realizes their wages are suddenly correct, because I found 2 separate underpayment errors that worked against them, which I'll be correcting this week, they'll know whose side the numbers are on. Caldwell was very still. The field crew was being underpaid, he said. Yes. She found the relevant pages in her folder and set them on his desk. It wasn't Patterson this time. I believe it was a genuine accounting error that had persisted for about 18 months. But the effect was the same. 7 workers owed back wages. She paused. I'd like to correct it before the end of the week, before word of Patterson's dismissal fully spreads. It will matter who they hear the news from and what it comes alongside. Caldwell looked at the pages. Then he looked at her. You've been here 10 days, he said. Yes, you've found an embezzler and a wage error affecting 7 workers in 10 days. The wage error was less hidden, Eleanor said. It only took me the one afternoon. Something moved across his face, something she was beginning carefully, tentatively to recognize. It was what he looked like when something genuinely surprised him, and he had not yet decided how to feel about being surprised. What else do you need? He asked. Eleanor considered the list she'd been building in her head since day 2. Full access to the correspondence with your creditors. The contracts with the 3 external vendors Patterson was managing. And an introduction to your field supervisors. I'd like them to know who I am before they hear the Patterson news from anyone else. Caldwell nodded slowly. I'll introduce you tomorrow morning, he said. All 3 of them. Thank you. She was at the door when he said Eleanor. She stopped, turned. He was standing by his desk, one hand resting on the surface, the posture he always defaulted to when he was thinking. He looked at her with that careful gray gaze. When I proposed this arrangement, he said, I told you I needed someone I could trust. You did, she said. I didn't know what that meant yet, he said. Not practically. A pause. I was wrong. I had no idea. Eleanor looked at him for a moment. Neither did I, she said honestly. I just knew I was capable of it. She left. In the corridor, she pressed her back briefly against the wall and let out a breath she'd been holding for the better part of an hour. Her hands were steady. Her voice had been steady throughout. But something in her chest had been hammering since the moment Patterson walked into that room and looked at her, like she was a problem he could manage. And she had looked back and known with absolute certainty that she was not. She had been right. She had been precise and calm and right, and Caldwell had backed her without hesitation, and Patterson was gone. She pushed off the wall. She straightened her dress. She went back to her office. There was still work to do. The introduction to the field supervisors happened the next morning before the day's work began. Caldwell brought her out to the yard where 3 men were already assembled. She gathered from the deliberateness of their postures that they'd been told to be there, not asked. Thomas Briggs was the oldest, a lean man in his 50s whose hands told a full biography of physical work. James Alcott was younger, perhaps 35, with an open face and the watchful eyes of a man who'd learned to read situations quickly. The third man, Samuel Cole, was somewhere in between, solid and quiet and withholding judgment. Gentleman, Caldwell said, this is Mrs. Caldwell. She manages the household accounts and has full authority over the estate's financial operations. You'll answer her questions the same as you'd answer mine. 3 pairs of eyes moved to Eleanor. She did not smile in the way that said, please like me. She smiled in the way that said, I'm paying attention. I've been reviewing the accounts for the past 10 days, she said. I have questions about the Eastern Field yield records from last summer, the discrepancy between the harvest log and the sale records. I'd like to meet with whoever kept those logs, Briggs said. That'd be Alcott. Alcott looked at her, assessing. I'm also correcting a wage discrepancy that affected 7 workers, Eleanor continued. I believe it was an accounting error, not intentional, but it's been running for about a year and a half. I'll have the corrected amounts to you by end of week, and back wages will be included in the next payment cycle. A shift in the quality of attention, subtle, but she felt it. Alcott said. Eleanor named them. Alcott said nothing. But something in his face changed, some last held-back thing releasing slightly. I'll meet with you separately, Eleanor said to each of them in turn. I'd like to understand how the operations actually run, not just what's been recorded. There's often a gap, and the gap is usually where the problems are. Briggs looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked at Briggs and said nothing, which was itself an answer. Briggs looked back at Eleanor. When do you want to start? This afternoon, Eleanor said, if you can spare an hour. They could. She walked back toward the house with Caldwell beside her. They did not speak for a moment. Then Caldwell said quietly, Alcott was one of Patterson's people. I know, Eleanor said. How? The way he didn't react when you mentioned Patterson's name yesterday. People who have nothing to hide react when someone they've worked alongside for years is accused of something. They argue, or they go silent, or they look uncomfortable. He went neutral. That's the reaction of someone who already knew there was something to know. Caldwell looked at her. That doesn't necessarily mean he was involved, Eleanor added. It means he suspected. There's a difference. I'd rather have him on our side than against us, and the way to do that is to treat him like someone who made a wise choice by not participating. Which may actually be the truth. They had reached the house. Caldwell stopped. Do you calculate everything this way? He asked. People? Eleanor considered this. I calculate situations, she said. People aren't numbers, but the way they move through situations tells you a great deal about them, if you're watching. He looked at her with that expression again, and the one she was beginning to map with more precision. The slight easing of the jaw, the particular stillness of his posture when something had genuinely registered. You're always watching, he said, not an accusation. An observation, aren't you? He paused. Yes, he said. Then we understand each other, Eleanor said. More than most people would expect. She went inside. He stood there a moment longer, in the summer heat, watching the door close behind her. 14 days after Eleanor Whitmore had arrived at Caldwell Manor, the household ran differently. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, but the accounts were in order. The wage corrections had been processed. 3 vendor contracts were under review. Mrs. Holt moved through the house with a slightly different quality of purpose, not hostile to Eleanor, not deferential, but something more useful than either. Collegial. The workers knew her name. More importantly, they knew she'd caught a discrepancy that benefited them. That kind of knowledge traveled through a property faster than anything Caldwell could have announced formally. Patterson was gone. The county had heard some version of why, filtered through whatever story he was telling, but Eleanor had learned long ago that what people believed depended largely on what they had seen with their own eyes. And what the workers at Caldwell Manor had seen with their own eyes was their back wages in hand. Virginia's opinion of Eleanor Caldwell was forming. She was aware of it. She could feel it the way you feel the shift in the air before weather changes, not certain yet, but coming. She had appeared at the county church the previous Sunday on Caldwell's arm, and the eyes of every woman in the county had moved over her, with the particular quality of women who have a verdict forming, and are deciding whether it's ready to deliver. She had worn her blue cotton dress, the plain one. But she had not apologized for it, but she was not naive. The county had expected someone else in Nathaniel Caldwell's wife. They had expected beauty, status, the thing they'd been promised when Victoria Whitmore was chosen. What they'd gotten was Eleanor Steady, plain Eleanor, who kept the books and corrected the wages and had arrived at this position because her sister had run away with a painter. They had not been unkind to her face, they were not that obvious. But Eleanor had heard, through Mrs. Holt, who heard through the cook, who heard through the delivery boy from town, that the county's consensus was roughly as follows. Caldwell had made the best of a bad situation. He'd taken what he could get. The plain sister was serviceable enough, clever with numbers, clearly useful in a practical sense. But had he chosen her? that the county had decided was not quite the same question. Caldwell heard it too. She knew he had when he came to find her in her office one evening, unusual enough that she looked up immediately when the door opened. He sat in the chair across from her desk without preamble. "Mrs. Whitmore called on us this afternoon," he said. Eleanor set down her pen. She stayed for tea. He paused, and something in the pause told Eleanor it was a significant pause. "She asked me privately whether I was satisfied with the arrangement." The room was very quiet. "She asked you," Eleanor said carefully, "whether you were satisfied." "Yes, while I was 20 feet away in this office." "Yes." Eleanor looked at the wall behind his shoulder for a moment. "What did you tell her?" she asked. "I told her yes," he said. "But that isn't why I'm here." She looked back at him. "I'm here because it occurred to me afterward that no one has asked you that question," he said. "Not me, not your family. Nobody has asked whether you are satisfied." Eleanor was still. "I'm telling you now," Caldwell said. "You may answer honestly. I have not found your honesty inconvenient yet, and I don't anticipate starting." She looked at him across the desk. She thought about what it would mean to answer honestly. She thought about the ledgers and the long quiet evenings and the satisfaction of work done thoroughly. She thought about the way he'd backed her completely in the confrontation with Patterson, without hesitation, without even a flicker of doubt. She thought about the fact that he had come to this room to ask her a question nobody else had thought to ask. "I am," she said, "more than I expected to be." He nodded. Then, and she would remember this later, in a different season, in a different kind of clarity, he said, "So am I." He stood, he went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "The county has opinions," he said, without turning. "About the arrangement. About whether I settled, I know," Eleanor said. "I want you to know," he said, "that I don't consider it settling." He left. Eleanor sat very still for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen. She went back to the ledgers. But her hand was not entirely steady, and she was willing privately, carefully to acknowledge why. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Eleanor was at her desk when Mrs. Holt brought it in, no knock, which meant Mrs. Holt had already decided it was urgent. She set it on the edge of the desk without speaking and stood back, and Eleanor looked at the handwriting on the front and felt something go very still in her chest. She recognized the hand. She had grown up watching it, the looping, pretty slightly careless script of someone who had never believed penmanship mattered, because everything else about her was already so pleasing. Victoria. Eleanor did not open it immediately. She set it flat on the desk and looked at it for a moment. The way you look at something you know is going to cost you something before you know what the price is. Then she opened it. The letter was 3 pages. Eleanor read all 3 without stopping. When she finished, she turned back to page 1 and read it again. Victoria was in Philadelphia. She was well. Emile the painter was finding work, though not as much as they'd hoped. The city was expensive. Their rooms were small. She was writing, she said, because she missed her family. She was writing because she had heard through a cousin who had heard through someone else that Eleanor had Nathaniel Caldwell. She was writing to say she was glad Eleanor had found a good situation. She was writing to say she hoped there were no hard feelings. The last paragraph was the one Eleanor read 3 times. "I know you were always the sensible one," Victoria had written. "I know you'll manage beautifully. You always do. I think in a way this worked out for the best for everyone. Nathaniel needed someone capable, and you needed a home of your own. I hope you're happy, Eleanor. Truly." Eleanor set the letter down. She stared at it, for the best, for everyone. She thought about her father's face the morning she'd left for Caldwell Manor. She thought about sitting in that coach alone, with her spine straight and her hands flat against her knees, telling herself she was not frightened. She thought about standing in Caldwell's study and offering her honesty like the only currency she had, because it was. She thought about 4 weeks of ledgers, and Patterson, and wage corrections, and Sunday mornings at the county church, feeling the weight of other women's assessments like something she wore over her dress. She thought about Nathaniel saying, "I don't consider it settling." Then she folded the letter, put it in the desk drawer, and locked it. She picked up her pen. She went back to work. She did not tell Caldwell about the letter that evening. Or the next day. She told him on the third day because she had decided on the first day that she would tell him, and she was not the kind of woman who let decisions she'd made quietly decay into avoidance. They were walking the eastern field boundary, something that had become an occasional habit, unplanned. The kind of thing that happens when two people who work alongside each other find that working alongside each other extends sometimes past the desk and the ledgers into the day itself. Caldwell had asked her opinion on a fencing decision. She was giving it. Somewhere in the middle of the conversation she said, "My sister wrote to me." He stopped walking. She kept going 2 paces, then turned to face him. "Victoria," he said. "Yes." He looked at her with careful attention. "What did she say? That she's well? That she's glad the situation worked out?" Eleanor paused. "She said she thinks it was for the best, for everyone." Caldwell was very still. "She believes," Eleanor continued, choosing her words with precision, "that this our marriage is something that happened to us, rather than something either of us chose. That I needed a home and you needed someone capable, and it all fell into place nicely." She met his eyes. "I wanted you to know the letter existed. I didn't want to be the kind of wife who keeps correspondence from her husband." "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, rather than when it arrived. "Because I needed 3 days to be sure I wasn't telling you out of anger," she said. "I was angry when I read it. I wanted to stop being angry first, so you'd get the fact of it rather than my feelings about it." Caldwell looked at her for a long, steady moment. "Are you still angry?" he asked. Eleanor considered this honestly. "Some," she said. "Less than I was. What made you angry?" She looked away briefly, not evasion, but the particular look of some finding accurate language for something that resists it. "She wrote as though I was lucky," Eleanor said finally. "As though I should be grateful that her choices left a space I was allowed to step into. As though I hadn't." She stopped. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Caldwell said. She looked back at him. His expression was open in a way. She didn't see often the watchfulness still there, but something behind it that was genuinely asking. "She wrote as though I hadn't made my own choices," Eleanor said quietly. "My own terms, my own decisions. She wrote as though this happened to me rather than because of me." She paused. "That's what I was angry about." Caldwell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you going to respond?" "I don't know yet." "If you do," he said carefully, "you might tell her that what happened here was chosen deliberately, by both parties." He paused. "If you think that's relevant." Eleanor looked at him. "I think it's relevant," she said. They walked back to the house in a silence that was not uncomfortable. The summer air was hot and thick and smelled of tobacco and cut grass, and somewhere in the trees that lined the northern field a bird was going through a long, complicated song, repeating the same phrase over and over, as if it was certain something was listening. The county social happened that weekend. Eleanor had known about it for 2 weeks. It was the kind of thing Mrs. Holt tracked with the precision of a military campaign, because county socials in Virginia in 1816 were not merely entertainment. They were the infrastructure of reputation. They were where alliances were maintained and information was traded, and women were assessed with a thoroughness that would have embarrassed any process that called itself judicial. Caldwell had said, simply, "You don't have to go if you don't want to." Eleanor had said, "I know, I'm going," because she wasn't going to pretend the county's opinion didn't matter. It did matter, not because she needed those women to like her. She was long past needing to be liked by people who'd already decided what she was, but because Caldwell's standing in this county was built on relationships, and relationships were built on occasions like this, and she was his wife, and she would not be the woman who hid in her office while her husband navigated his world alone. The Hargrove estate was large and full of the particular noise of people performing sociability. Eleanor had been to events like this before, always as a Whitmore daughter, always in Victoria's orbit, always the one standing slightly to the side while her sister drew the room's attention like light through a prism. This time, she arrived on Nathaniel Caldwell's arm. The difference was immediate and remarkable, and she catalogued it with the same precise attention she gave to ledger discrepancies. People did not ignore her, they could not on his arm. But the manner of attention was specific. There was curiosity genuine and sharp. There was assessment. There were women whose glances moved from her face to Caldwell's face and back again, calculating something. And there was, from the Hargrove matriarch, a woman named Constance Hargrove who had the posture of someone who had been told she was important so many times it had fused with her spine a greeting that was technically warm and functionally not. "Mrs. Caldwell," Constance Hargrove said, "how delightful. We've been so curious about you." "Have you?" Eleanor said pleasantly. "Of course. Such an unexpected turn of events. We were all so fond of your sister." The word were sat in the sentence, like a barb dressed as a ribbon. "Victoria as well," Eleanor said. "She's in Philadelphia." Constance Hargrove tilted her head with the expression of a woman delivering a blow she intends to look like sympathy. It must be so difficult, stepping into a position that was designed for someone else. Finding one's footing, Eleanor looked at her. She felt Caldwell's hand shift slightly at her side, not a warning, not a pull. To presence, steady. "There actually," Eleanor said, "I found the footing quite straightforward. The accounts were in need of attention when I arrived, and they're in order now. The staff is excellent, and my husband has been," she let the word land cleanly, entirely clear about what he values in a marriage. "Which, as it turns out, is very close to what I value myself. So the fit has been rather better than unexpected." Constance Hargrove smiled the smile of a woman who has been checked, but will not concede it. "How practical," she said. Thoroughly, Eleanor agreed. "If you'll excuse us." She moved them both forward, smooth and unhurried. Caldwell said nothing until they were well past. Then, quietly, close to her ear, he said, "That was well done." "She'll say something worse before the evening's over," Eleanor said. "Probably," he said. "Does that concern you?" Eleanor thought about it honestly. "It concerns me for your sake," she said, "not mine. I've been managed around by women like that my entire life." "I know the language. You seem to speak it fluently yourself," he said. There was something in his voice, not quite amusement, but warmth adjacent to it. "I learned from observation," Eleanor said dryly. "One of the few advantages of being overlooked. You learn how everything actually works." He looked at her sideways. "I believe that," he said. The evening went the way these evenings went, slowly, in layers, with social information accumulating like sediment until you were standing in several inches of it and had to decide how to move. Eleanor spoke with a woman named Lydia Alcott, wife of James Alcott, the field supervisor, which meant the conversation was easier and more genuine than most. She spoke with two women who seemed to have decided she was interesting, without yet deciding whether that was good or bad. She spoke with a minister's wife who was curious about the Whitmore family history, and whom Eleanor redirected with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent years managing conversations her family couldn't afford to let run unchecked. She was good at this. She had always been good at this, in rooms where being good at it earned no credit, because her sister was in the same room, being effortlessly brilliant at everything else. Here there was no Victoria. There was only Eleanor. And Eleanor, it turned out, was considerable. She felt it the way you feel the shift in a room when something changes, not dramatic, not announced, but real. The quality of attention moving toward her. Not because she was beautiful. Not because she was performing something. Because she was present and precise and entirely quietly herself. Caldwell noticed. She could tell he noticed by the way he moved through the room, always aware of where she was, always with that particular quality of listening when she was near, as though whatever she was saying was worth tracking. It was Constance Hargrove who provided the evening's actual climax. She did it in the garden, which meant there were fewer witnesses than the parlor would have provided, though not no witnesses. She found Eleanor standing with Lydia Alcott and a woman named Frances Webb, and she inserted herself into the conversation with the precision of someone who has chosen their moment deliberately. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said sweetly, I was just speaking with my husband about your family's situation. Such a trial these past months, your poor father. And of course, the business with your sister, well. She sighed in the manner of someone enjoying a sigh. At least one good thing came of it. The women around them went very still. Eleanor turned to look at Constance Hargrove fully. "I'm sure you mean well," Eleanor said in a tone that was so even and clear it left no room for misunderstanding. "But I'll ask you to be direct, Mrs. Hargrove, because I find implication tiresome. If you have something to say about my family, or my marriage, or how I came to be in this county, I'd rather you say it plainly so I can respond to it plainly." Constance Hargrove blinked. She had clearly not expected this. You meant, Eleanor said, that my position here is something I stumbled into because of my sister's choices, and that I should be grateful for it, and perhaps a little humble about my standing." She paused. "I understand the implication. I'm telling you it's incorrect." Constance Hargrove drew herself up. "I beg your pardon." "I negotiated this marriage," Eleanor said. "I set the terms. I came to Caldwell Manor, and I did the work that was needed, and I've continued doing it, and the property is better for it. I don't say this to impress you, Mrs. Hargrove. I say it because you are making assumptions about my situation based on what you think should be true, rather than what is, and I won't quietly allow those assumptions to stand." The garden was very quiet. Then Lydia Alcott said, in a voice that was entirely calm and slightly warm, "My husband tells me, Mrs. Caldwell corrected a wage discrepancy that had been running against the field workers for a year and a half. She found it in her first week. Francis Webb looked at Eleanor with undisguised interest. "You found it yourself?" "In the source ledgers," Eleanor said, and her voice had returned to its normal register, the confrontational edge released, now that the necessary thing had been said. "The summary sheets looked fine, but summary sheets are only as good as what they summarize." Constance Hargrove made a small sound, then she excused herself. She did not return to the garden for the rest of the evening. On the ride home, Eleanor sat beside Caldwell in the dark of the carriage and let herself be tired. Not visibly, but internally, genuinely, allowing herself to feel the weight of an evening spent performing competence and calm for people who were measuring every word. She thought Caldwell was quiet because he was thinking. He spoke first. "You handled Hargrove well." "I was blunter than I intended to be," Eleanor said. "Was that a mistake?" She thought about it. "No," she said. "It was necessary. The alternative was to absorb it, and if I'd absorbed it, she'd have tried something worse next time." "She'll try something worse anyway," Caldwell said. "Yes, but now she knows I won't absorb it." A pause. "And now everyone who was standing there knows it too." He was quiet for a moment. "Then the county will recalibrate its opinion of you after tonight." "Is that a concern?" Eleanor asked, "or an observation?" "An observation," he said. "Not a concern. You were right to say what you said." Eleanor turned to look at him in the dark carriage, where the lack of full light made the conversation feel different, more direct in a strange way, less mediated by all the performance of their days. "Nathaniel," she said. His first name still felt new in her mouth. She used it rarely, and always deliberately. "Yes. Does it trouble you?" she asked. "What people say?" "About how this came to be." He was quiet long enough that she began to wonder if she'd miscalculated. Then he said, "What troubles me is the assumption that I was passive in it." She looked at him. "People say I made the best of the situation," he said. "That I accepted a substitute. That I was given a replacement and accommodated it gracefully." His voice was even, but something in it had tightened. "I didn't accommodate anything. I looked at you, the woman who walked into my study, and told me the truth without being asked, and I made a decision. Deliberately." Eleanor said nothing for a moment. "You've never told me that," she said. "I'm telling you now." The carriage moved through the dark Virginia road, and Eleanor sat with what he'd said and felt it settle into something. She hadn't had a name for something between relief and recognition, between gratitude and a sharper, more complicated thing that she was not quite ready to name. "I negotiated my own terms," she said quietly, "before I agreed." "I know," he said. "That's why I agreed to them." She turned to look at him again. Because I negotiated? She asked. Because you knew your own worth well enough to name it, he said. When most people in your position would have been grateful for whatever was offered. So, the carriage slowed as they turned into the Caldwell Manor drive. Eleanor looked forward through the window. I wasn't ungrateful, she said carefully. I was just clear. That's exactly it. 3 days after the Hargrove social, Victoria appeared on the doorstep of Caldwell Manor. Eleanor was in her office when Mrs. Holt actually knocked this time, which told her immediately that something was different. Ma'am, Mrs. Holt said, there is a woman at the door. She says she's your sister. Eleanor set down her pen. She stood. She walked to the front of the house and opened the door herself. Victoria Whitmore stood on the front step. She was still beautiful, that had not changed. The golden hair, the wide blue eyes, the kind of face that made people feel they'd been given something just by looking at it. But she was thinner than Eleanor remembered. Her dress was well made but not new. There were shadows under her eyes that had not been there a year ago, and she was holding herself with a quality of careful arrangement, the way people hold themselves when they are not entirely all right, but are determined to appear so. Eleanor, Victoria said. Victoria, Eleanor said. A pause. May I, Victoria asked. Eleanor stepped back. Victoria walked through the door. She looked around the entrance hall, the house, the quality of it, the evidence everywhere of a substantial and well-ordered life, and something moved across her face that was too complicated and too quick for Eleanor to read cleanly. You look well, Victoria said. You look tired, Eleanor said. Victoria laughed. It was a real laugh surprised out of her, brief and genuine. You always did do that. What? Say the exact true thing at the exact wrong moment. Victoria looked at her. It's one of the things I missed. Eleanor looked at her sister and felt the strange, layered feeling of it, the love that doesn't go away just because you're angry, the anger that doesn't go away just because the love is still there. Come and sit, Eleanor said. I'll have tea brought. They sat in the small parlor off the main hall. Not the formal one, the smaller one, which was warmer and less staged. Victoria wrapped her hands around her teacup and did not speak for a moment. Then she said, Emile has gone. Eleanor looked at her. He left, Victoria said, 6 weeks ago. There was another woman, a patron's daughter in Philadelphia. Younger. She said it with the flatness of someone who has already moved through the acutest part of the pain and arrived at the place where it lives as fact rather than wound. I didn't come to complain about it. I'm telling you because it's why I'm here, and you'd figure it out anyway. Yes, Eleanor said. I would. Victoria looked at her. You're not going to say I deserved it. No, Eleanor said. You didn't deserve it. You made choices that cost your family a great deal and caused real harm. But a man leaving you for someone younger isn't justice. It's just something that happened. Victoria looked down at her tea. I want to come home, she said quietly. I don't know. I need somewhere to be, Eleanor, just for a while. Just until I can think clearly again. Home is Whitmore House, Eleanor said. That's not my decision to make. I know, Victoria said. I'll go to Mother and Father. I just wanted to. She stopped. She looked at Eleanor with an expression that was unguarded, in a way Eleanor hadn't seen since they were children. I wanted to see you first. I wanted to apologize. Eleanor was quiet. Not just for the engagement, Victoria said. For all of it. For letting them send you. For the letter I wrote, where I made it sound like everything had worked out nicely. When really I was too ashamed to admit that you'd done something brave and I'd done something selfish, and the difference between us had been made absolutely plain. She paused. I'm sorry, Eleanor. Not the performed kind, the real kind. The room was very still. Eleanor looked at her sister, at the exhaustion behind the beauty, at the courage it had taken to come to this door and say that. At the familiar face of the person who had always been chosen first and had never once considered that Eleanor was choosing things too. I know, Eleanor said finally. Victoria exhaled. It's more than I deserve, she said. Probably, Eleanor agreed. But deserving isn't always the relevant question. Victoria almost smiled. When did you get so wise? I've been managing ledgers since I was 16, Eleanor said. You develop a view of things. This time Victoria did smile. And for a moment, just a moment, they were simply two sisters in a room, with all the complicated weight of what they were to each other. And the tea was warm, and the summer air was coming through the window, and whatever happened next was not yet determined. Caldwell came in an hour later. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Victoria. His expression moved through nothing visible. He had that quality of absolute control over his face in moments of surprise that Eleanor had come to admire and occasionally find unnerving. He looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at him. The last time they had seen each other, she had been supposed to marry him. That fact was in the room, fully. There was no version of this moment that didn't contain it. Mr. Caldwell, Victoria said. She had gathered herself. Eleanor could see the natural grace reasserted, the composure rebuilt. I owe you an apology. You owe me nothing, Caldwell said. His voice was even and final. What you did was done. What came after was managed. We don't need to revisit it. Victoria looked at him with an expression that was surprised and, Eleanor thought, quietly pained, not because she wanted him, but because his indifference was perhaps the plainest measurement of what she'd thrown away. You've done well, Victoria said, meaning the house, meaning Eleanor, meaning all of it. Yes, Caldwell said simply. He did not look at Victoria again. He looked at Eleanor. I need to speak with you when you have a moment, he said. About the web contract, whenever you're ready. I'll find you shortly, Eleanor said. He nodded. He left. Victoria watched the door after he'd gone. He looks at you differently than I expected, she said quietly. Eleanor said nothing. He looks at you like you're the only solid thing in the room, Victoria said. She turned to look at Eleanor. I don't think he ever looked at me that way. I don't think I would have noticed if he had. The truth of that sat between them. Go to Mother and Father, Eleanor said. They'll be glad to have you home. Father especially, and you, Victoria asked. Will you be glad? Eleanor looked at her sister. She thought about a year ago about standing at a window in Whitmore House, watching the sun come up on a morning when everything was about to change, telling herself she was not frightened. I'm glad you came here first, Eleanor said. Yes. Victoria stood. She set down her teacup. She looked at her sister, really looked, in the way she should have been looking for years, with the kind of attention Eleanor had always given the world but rarely received in return. You always deserved more than you were given, Victoria said. I know, Eleanor said. I gave it to myself. After Victoria left, Eleanor stood in the parlor alone for a moment. She thought about the girl who had sat in a hired coach 3 months ago, with her spine straight and her hands flat against her knees, telling herself she was not frightened. She thought about standing in this house for the first time, a stranger in a place that had no reason to want her. She thought about the Ledgers and Patterson and Mrs. Holt and the county social and Constance Hargrove's careful cruelty, and the way Caldwell had said, in the dark of a garage, I looked at you and I made a decision. She thought about Victoria's face when she'd seen the house. When she'd seen Caldwell look at Eleanor the way he looked at her. She thought about what it meant to be chosen, not by default. Not out of circumstance, but deliberately, with full knowledge of the alternatives, by someone who had looked at what she actually was rather than what she was supposed to be. She went to find Caldwell. He was in his study, standing at his desk. He looked up when she entered. The web contract, he said. In a moment, Eleanor said. She walked to the center of the room and stopped. She looked at him directly. I want to ask you something, she said. And I want you to answer honestly. When have I not, he said. Never, she said. That's why I'm asking. She paused. When you said, in the carriage, that you made a decision, a deliberate one. What did you mean by it? Caldwell looked at her steadily. The clock on the mantelpiece moved through its slow, mechanical breath. I meant, he said, exactly what I said. I need you to be more precise, Eleanor said. Her voice was steady, but something in it was asked more than the words were asking. He came around the desk. He walked toward her. He stopped at a distance that was Close enough to be deliberate, close enough that she could see the particular quality of his expression, clearly the watchfulness and the warmth underneath it that she had been learning to read for 3 months. "I chose you," he said. "Not the practical resolution. You. The woman who walked into my house and told me the truth without flinching, and asked for what she needed without apology, and spent the next 3 months proving that every instinct I'd had about her was accurate." He paused. "Is that precise enough?" "Yes," she said quietly. "That's precise enough." She did not look away. He did not look away. "The web contract," he said after a moment. "Right," she said. "Yes." She moved to the desk. He moved beside her. They stood close, looking at the same pages, and the summer heat pressed against the windows. And outside the county of Virginia went about its business. And inside the study of Caldwell Manor something had shifted quietly, irrevocably into a different kind of truth. The ledgers were spread between them. Eleanor picked up her pen. She began to work. The web contract nearly ruined everything. Not the contract itself. The contract was straightforward. A timber supply arrangement that Eleanor had reviewed and found reasonably structured, with 2 clauses she'd recommended revising, and Caldwell had agreed to revise. The contract was fine. It was Robert Webb himself who was the problem. Robert Webb was 58 years old, a third-generation Virginia landowner who had done business with Caldwell Manor for 11 years and who held, apparently, a very specific idea of what a man's wife was for. He arrived at the manor on a Wednesday morning for the signing, sat down across the desk from Eleanor and Caldwell, and addressed every single word to Caldwell. Every word. Eleanor had the revised contract in front of her. She had written the revisions. She knew every line of it better than either man in the room. And Robert Webb spoke to Caldwell about each clause, as though Eleanor were a decorative object that had been placed near the window for reasons of aesthetics. She let it go for the first 10 minutes. She let it go because she was deciding whether the correction was worth making in front of Webb, or whether it was more strategically useful to let him believe what he believed for now, and deal with the consequences of that belief later. She decided, after the 10th minute, that letting it stand would cost more than correcting it. "Mr. Webb," she said. He stopped mid-sentence and looked at her. The look of a man who is mildly surprised a piece of furniture has spoken. "The 3rd clause, the one you're discussing now, was revised at my recommendation," Eleanor said. "The original language created an ambiguity around the delivery timeline that would have benefited your operation at the expense of the estate during the winter months. The revision protects both parties equally." She paused. "If you have questions about it, I can answer them directly." Webb looked at Caldwell. Caldwell looked back at him and said nothing. That nothing was everything. Webb looked at Eleanor. He had the expression of a man recalibrating not graciously but practically. He was a businessman. He understood that the power in the room had just been mapped for him clearly. "The revision is acceptable," Webb said. "Good," Eleanor said. "Shall we continue?" They continued. After Webb left contract signed, handshake firm, dignity somewhat rearranged, Caldwell looked at Eleanor across the desk. 10 minutes, he said. "I wanted to be sure it was necessary," she said. "Was there a point at which you thought it might not be?" "No," she said. "But I like to be certain," he almost smiled. She was learning that she could reliably produce that almost smile with a particular quality of dry honesty, and she had discovered, to her own mild surprise, that she liked producing it. "Webb will tell people about this," she said. "Yes," Caldwell said. "He'll tell it as a story about a wife who overstepped." "He might," Caldwell said. "Or he might tell it as a story about a wife who knew the contract better than he did. It depends on whether his pride or his practicality wins." A pause. "In my experience, Webb's practicality usually wins. He's too good a businessman to resent competence permanently." Eleanor gathered the signed papers, "And if his pride wins, then the people he tells will know he lost an argument to a woman and still signed the contract," Caldwell said. "Which tells its own story." Eleanor looked at him. "You're not concerned," she said. "I'm not," he said. "Are you?" She thought about it honestly. I'm strategic, she said. That's different. The summer deepened. August settled over Virginia like a weight-thick heat, hard sun, the particular smell of dry earth and tobacco, and the edge of something changing. Eleanor had been at Caldwell Manor for 4 months. In those 4 months, she had restructured 3 vendor contracts, corrected the wage records for 7 workers, overseen the dismissal of 1 dishonest overseer, hired his replacement after interviewing 4 candidates and recommending the one Caldwell hadn't initially favored, and been proven right within 6 weeks when the new man's records came in clean and thorough. She had attended 2 county socials, 1 church fundraising event, and a dinner at the Hargrove estate that had been, by any reasonable measure, a more significant social test than anything she'd faced yet. She had passed, not because she'd performed anything, because she'd been exactly herself, precise, present, unafraid of silence, and equally unafraid of direct speech. And the people in that room who were worth impressing had been impressed, and the people who weren't worth impressing had not been. And Eleanor had made peace with the mathematics of that a long time ago. What she had not made peace with exactly was the thing that was happening between herself and Caldwell. Not because it was bad, it was not bad. It was, in fact, and she approached this assessment the way she approached all assessments, carefully, without letting feeling outrun evidence, something she had no prior experience measuring. He sought her opinions, not performatively, not in the way that would have said, I am being courteous to my wife. He sought them the way he'd seek the opinion of someone whose thinking he had learned to trust. He asked questions that assumed she'd thought about things. He listened to her answers with the full quality of his attention, which was, Eleanor had learned, a rare and specific thing. He had begun, in small and unremarked ways, to move through the house differently when she was in it. A slight orientation toward whatever room she was in. A quality of listening that extended past conversation. She noticed these things the way she noticed patterns in ledgers, not dramatically, but with the accumulating certainty of someone who understands that small, consistent data points add up to something real. She did not know what to do with it yet. She knew what she felt. She was honest enough with herself to know that. But feeling something and knowing what to do with it were different problems, and Eleanor preferred to have a clear answer before she moved. She was still working toward the clear answer when the letter from the Hargrove lawyer arrived. It came addressed to Caldwell, which was normal. He brought it to her office that afternoon, which had become their way. Anything touching the estate's finances or contracts came first to her desk. He set it down without speaking. His expression was careful in a particular way that told her it was significant before she read a word. She read it, then she read it again. They're contesting the eastern field boundary, she said. Yes, on the basis of a survey conducted in 1809. Apparently, Eleanor set the letter flat on the desk. She looked at it. The 1809 survey was conducted by a man named Daniel Hargrove. Constance Hargrove's late father-in-law, Caldwell said, who would have had every incentive to mark the boundary line in a manner favorable to the Hargrove estate. Yes, Eleanor was quiet for a moment. This isn't really about the land, she said. No, Caldwell said, it is not. She looked up at him. This is about the social. He met her eyes. That is my belief. Eleanor thought about Constance Hargrove's face in the garden, the careful social cruelty, the precise implication, and then Eleanor's refusal to absorb it. She thought about the way that conversation had ended, with Constance excusing herself and not returning to the garden. Pride. She had bet on Webb's practicality winning over his pride. She should have made the same calculation about Constance Hargrove and not liked the result. She waited a month, Eleanor said. She's smarter than I gave her credit for. She is, Caldwell said. Don't underestimate her again. The firmness in that, not unkind, but entirely direct, was the kind of thing she appreciated about him. He did not soften corrections to protect her feelings. He trusted her to receive them. What's the actual strength of our position, she asked. Depends on the survey records, he said. I have documentation from 1814 that marks the boundary differently. But the 1809 survey predates mine. Who conducted the 1814 survey? A man named Harrison, out of Richmond. Is he still practicing? I believe so. Eleanor picked up her pen. I'll write to him today. I want the original field notes, not just the summary document. The summary document is what gets argued in front of a magistrate. The field notes are where you find the truth. She was already writing. I also want every correspondence between your family and the Hargrove estate, going back as far as you have records. If this boundary has ever been acknowledged even informally in a letter, that matters. Caldwell looked at her. You've done this before, he said. It was not quite a question. My father had a boundary dispute with a neighbor when I was 19, Eleanor said, still writing. We lost because we didn't have the field notes. I've never forgotten it. She looked up briefly. We won't lose this one, she said. She wrote to Harrison in Richmond. She went through every correspondence file, in the Caldwell Manor records, 12 years of letters, invoices, agreements, and miscellany, organized by date in the back storage room that smelled of paper and old wood. She spent 3 days in that room, reading, cataloging, making notes. On the second day, Mrs. Holt appeared in the doorway with a cup of tea and a look of something that had moved past collegial into genuinely concern. You haven't eaten since this morning, Mrs. Holt said. I'll eat this evening, Eleanor said. You said that yesterday. Eleanor looked up. Mrs. Holt's expression was firm and also something else. Fond, perhaps, in the particular way of women who have watched someone work hard and have decided that person deserves to be looked after. Sit down for 20 minutes and drink the tea, Mrs. Holt said. The records will still be here. Eleanor sat. She drank the tea. She ate the biscuits Mrs. Holt had also brought without mentioning. She's doing this because of what happened at the social, Eleanor said. It was not a question. Constance Hargrove, Mrs. Holt said, settling into the other chair without being asked, has been the most important woman in this county for 20 years, because nobody has ever said no to her in front of other people. A pause. You said no to her in front of 4 people, at least 2 of whom told others, and now it's 12. I know, Eleanor said. She won't stop at the boundary claim. I know that too, Eleanor said. What else does she have? Mrs. Holt looked at her steadily. She's been talking. About how you came to be here, the circumstances of it. Making sure people remember that you were not the intended bride, that the intended bride left, and you were the substitute. Eleanor held the teacup. Is it working, she asked. With some, Mrs. Holt said honestly. The ones who were already inclined to dismiss you. But not with the ones who matter. Not with anyone who's actually dealt with you directly. Eleanor set down the cup. Then we hold the line on the boundary, and we don't give her anything else to work with. And the marriage? Mrs. Holt said carefully. Eleanor looked at her. People talk about that too, Mrs. Holt said. They wonder if it's real. Or if it's the arrangement it started as. She paused. I'm not asking for myself. I can see perfectly well what it is from inside this house. But outside. Outside people wonder if Caldwell settled, Eleanor said. Yes, Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Let them wonder, she said. The truth doesn't change because people doubt it. But she thought about it that evening. She thought about it alone in her office, after the house had gone quiet. She thought about what Mrs. Holt had said. I can see perfectly well what it is from inside this house, and what that meant, coming from a woman of 60 who had seen the inside of this house for 12 years and was not given to sentiment. She thought about what she knew, and what she was certain of, and where the line was between the two. Then Caldwell knocked on her office door late, later than he usually appeared, and opened it without waiting. He looked at her. You're still working, he said. I found something, she said. Come look at this. The letter was dated September 1811. It was from the previous Hargrove Constance's husband, now dead to Caldwell's father, now also dead. It was about a fence repair on the eastern boundary. And in it, the elder Hargrove referred, in passing, to the boundary marker as being at a location that matched precisely the 814 survey, not the 1,809 one. A letter. From a Hargrove, acknowledging the boundary that Constance Hargrove was now contesting. Caldwell read it, standing beside her desk, leaning down, close enough that she could hear him breathing. He read it twice, then he straightened. "Where did you find this?" he said. "Box 7, Eleanor said. 1,811 correspondence, toward the back. It had been filed between 2 invoices, which is why it wasn't indexed." He looked at her. "Eleanor," he said. "I know," she said. "This wins the case." "It wins the case," she agreed. "Before it becomes a case, ideally. If we send this to Hargrove's lawyer before any formal hearing is scheduled, they'll drop the claim rather than put that letter in front of a magistrate." He looked at her with that expression, the one she had learned, the warmth underneath the watchfulness, the slight easing of something held carefully for a long time. "How long were you going to sit on this before you told me?" he asked. "Until you knocked on the door," she said. "Which you did." He almost laughed, not quite, but almost a sound in his chest that was the precursor to it. "Send it tomorrow," he said. "First thing." "I'll have it ready tonight," she said. He didn't leave. She noticed that. He stood beside her desk and looked at her, just something that had moved past his usual carefully maintained distance, and the room was quiet in the late-night way of rooms that have absorbed a long day and gone still. "I owe you an apology," he said. She looked up. "For what?" "I underestimated what it would cost you," he said. "To come here. To do what you've done. I thought I understood the arrangement from your side, what you needed, what you'd agreed to. I didn't understand how much you'd be asked to prove, by people who had no right to ask it, before they'd accept you." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "You didn't cause that," she said. "No, but I also didn't warn you, and I could have—" She was quiet for a moment. "Would it have changed anything?" she asked. If he thought about it. "No," he said. "I don't think you'd have made a different choice." "Then the apology is unnecessary," she said. She paused. "I'll take it anyway, because you mean it." He looked at her. "I do," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'll take it." The letter went to Hargrove's lawyer the following morning. The response came back in 4 days. The boundary claim was being withdrawn. No explanation offered, none was needed. The letter spoke for itself, and everyone involved knew it. Eleanor was in her office when Caldwell brought her the withdrawal notice. He set it on her desk. She read it. She set it down. She felt the satisfaction of it, clean and specific, the satisfaction of a problem correctly solved. She had learned, over the years of managing things other people couldn't face, to let herself feel that satisfaction without diminishing it. It was hers. She had earned it. "It's done," Caldwell said. "It's done," she agreed. He sat down across from her. He did something he rarely did. He sat without an immediate agenda, without a question or a contract. He simply sat. "The county will hear about this," he said. "They always do. They'll know you found the letter," he said. "Hargrove's lawyer will tell people. These things travel." "Let them travel," Eleanor said. "You're not worried about how it looks?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "If it looks like a wife who found the document that won her husband's case, that's exactly what it was. And if it looks like a wife who has more power in this household than people expected." Eleanor looked at him. "Then it looks accurate," she said. Something passed between them in the silence, not for the first time, but with more clarity than before. The kind of moment that doesn't announce itself, but that you know, even in the middle of it, you'll remember. "I have something to tell you," Caldwell said. Eleanor waited. "I wrote to my solicitor in Richmond last month," he said. "About the property settlement structure. The terms of our marriage agreement." He paused. "I've had it revised." She looked at him. "Revised how?" "The original terms gave you management authority over the household accounts," he said. "The revision gives you joint ownership authority over the estate finances. Not just management co-ownership. Any major financial decision requires both our agreements." He paused. "It should have been that from the beginning. I corrected the oversight." Eleanor sat very still. "You did that without telling me," she said. I'm telling you now. When did you do it? 3 weeks ago, he said. After Webb. After Webb. After she'd looked Robert Webb in the face and told him directly that she'd written the contract revision and could answer questions about it. After Caldwell had watched that and said nothing except that was well done. Nathaniel, she said, yes, that's a substantial change. It is. You didn't need to make it. I know, he said. I made it because it's accurate. You have been managing this estate with the authority of a co-owner for 4 months. The legal documents should reflect what's actually true. Eleanor looked at him for a long time. She thought about a version of herself that would have been overwhelmed by this. A version that would have felt the enormity of it, the trust implied, the legal weight of it, the extraordinary nature of a man in 1816 Virginia handing his wife co-ownership of anything, and would have been undone by the failing. She was not that version. She looked at him steadily and she said, "Thank you." "You don't seem surprised," he observed. "I'm surprised," she said. "I'm just not undone by it." "I didn't think you would be," he said. "That's partly why I did it." The news that the Hargrove boundary claim had been dropped spread through the county within a week, as these things do. And with it more slowly, but with the particular persistence of information that carries a good story, the news that the resolution had come from a letter Eleanor Caldwell had found in a storage room, in a box, between 2 invoices after 3 days of looking. Constance Hargrove did not call on them. She did not send a note. Eleanor had not expected her to, but Lydia Alcott called. Frances Webb called. 2 women from the church committee called, ostensibly about the autumn fundraiser, and actually about something else. Curiosity, Eleanor recognized. Genuine, respectful curiosity about the woman who had just quietly defeated the most powerful social figure in the county without raising her voice. Eleanor received them all with the same quality of attention. Not warm in the performance of warmth way, but genuinely present. She asked questions. She listened to the answers. She remembered things. She was discovering rather good at being in society. Not in the way Victoria had been good at it, not with that easy radiant magnetism that drew people without effort. Eleanor drew people differently, with the quality of her listening, with the precision of her conversation, with the sense she gave, and it was not performed, it was simply true that she found people genuinely interesting and was paying close attention. Mrs. Holt told her, after the second visit from the church committee women, that the county's current consensus had shifted. "They're saying you're formidable," Mrs. Holt said. "Is that good?" Eleanor asked. "For your purposes, Mrs. Holt said, "Yes. The night of the harvest supper, a tradition at Caldwell Manor, the workers and their families. The end of the summer season." Eleanor stood with Caldwell beside her and watched the property as she had spent 4 months learning come alive in a different way. She knew the names of the workers' children. She had learned them deliberately, because names mattered, because people who felt known worked differently than people who felt invisible, and because she had spent enough of her life being invisible to understand exactly what the alternative cost. Thomas Briggs approached her during the evening. He was not a man who approached anyone without reason. Eleanor had learned that about him. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, turning his hat in his hands. "I want to say something, if that's all right." "Of course," she said. "When you first came," Briggs said slowly, "I didn't know what to make of you. No offense meant. I'd seen certain things, and I had a way of understanding how this place worked, and you didn't fit it." "I know," Eleanor said. "I was wrong," he said. "The way you handled Patterson, and then the wages, and then that business with Hargrove, I seen a lot of things in my time on this land. I ain't seen many people do what you did the way you did it." He looked at her with a directness that was its own kind of respect. "You're good for this place, ma'am," he said. "I wanted you to know that somebody who knows this land well said it." Eleanor looked at him. She felt the weight of it, a real weight, not the social weight of county opinions and formal assessments, but the particular weight of being seen clearly by someone who had no reason to flatter her, and every reason to know the difference. "Thank you, Mr. Briggs," she said. "That means a great deal to me." He nodded. He put his hat back on. He walked away. Caldwell had been standing close enough to hear. She felt him beside her, the warmth of him in the cooling evening, the steadiness she had come to find not just useful but genuinely settling. "Well," he said quietly. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were going to say I told you so." "I wasn't," he said. "I was going to say that a man like Briggs doesn't say things like that unless he means them." "I know," Eleanor said. She was quiet for a moment. "It's the first time in my life someone who had nothing to gain said something like that to me." Caldwell was quiet. "Then they were fools," he said. "All of them." She looked at him. The evening was warm and loud and smelled of wood smoke and late summer. Around them people were laughing, the kind of laughing that happens when people who work hard together stop working and simply exist together. Children ran past. Someone was playing a fiddle somewhere beyond the barn. "I want to tell you something," Eleanor said. "Tell me," he said. 4 months ago I came to this house because I had no choice, and I made the best decision I could with the options available." She paused. "That's not what's true anymore." He looked at her. Steady, waiting. "If you gave me the choice now," she said, "with full knowledge of everything, the work, the county, Constance, Hargrove, Patterson, Webb, all of it, I would choose this. I would choose here." She paused once more. "I would choose you." The fiddle played on. Caldwell looked at her the way she had, she realized, been wanting him to look at her for weeks, not the watchfulness, not the assessment, but something warmer and more open and less guarded than any expression she had seen on his face before. He said, "Eleanor." "Yes," she said. "I chose you," he said. "Before I knew what choosing you would mean, before I had any idea what you were." He paused. "I know now, and I would choose you with every piece of that knowledge." She held, she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not quite, but they were close. He reached out and took one of them. Not performed, not formal, simply his hand around hers in the evening air in front of no one in particular and everyone in general. She held on. Around them the harvest supper went on, loud and warm and alive, and Caldwell Manor felt, for the first time in Eleanor's 4 months of living in it, entirely like home. The autumn came in hard that year. September turned the Virginia air sharp and deliberate, the kind of cold that arrives before you expect it and reminds you that the land operates on its own schedule, regardless of what the people living on it have planned. Eleanor felt it. The morning after the harvest supper, woke early, as she always did, and stood at the window of the room she had come to think of as genuinely hers, and breathed in the changed air, and understood that something was shifting. Not just the season, everything. She had been at Caldwell Manor 5 months. She had come here as a substitute, a practical resolution, a woman sent to manage the damage her sister had caused. She was leaving that version of herself the way you leave a coat that no longer fits, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the accumulating certainty that it was never really yours to begin with. What she was now was something she was still learning to name. She dressed, went to her office, opened the ledgers. The morning routine was hers as completely as anything she'd ever owned. But she had barely settled into the first hour of work when Mrs. Holt appeared at the door, and the expression on Mrs. Holt's face told Eleanor that the morning was not going to go the way she'd planned. "There's a man here," Mrs. Holt said. "A lawyer. From Richmond. He says he has business with Mr. Caldwell." A pause. "He also says he has business with you." Eleanor looked up. "With me specifically?" "By name," Mrs. Holt said. "He asked for Mrs. Eleanor Caldwell." The lawyer's name was Aldous Prentice. He was thin and precise, with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to men who have spent decades in rooms where the wrong word costs everything. He sat across from Eleanor and Caldwell in the main study and set a leather document case on the desk between them with the careful deliberateness of a man who knows what's inside it and what it means. "I represent the estate of Mr. Gerald Whitmore," he said. Eleanor went very still. Gerald Whitmore was her father's older brother. Her uncle. A man she had met perhaps 4 times in her life at family gatherings, always at a remove. always with the quality of someone who had chosen distance from the Whitmore family and maintained it with the consistency of intention rather than circumstance. He had never married. He had lived in Richmond, managed a modest but solid set of properties, and corresponded with her father rarely and briefly. He had died 6 weeks ago, apparently. Eleanor had not known. "I wasn't informed of his death," she said. "Your family was informed," Prentice said, carefully neutral. "Whether that information was passed to you is outside my knowledge." Eleanor absorbed this without expression. She filed it in the place. She kept things that required feeling later, when she was alone, and had the space to feel them properly. "What is the nature of his estate?" Caldwell asked. Prentice opened the document case. 3 properties in Richmond, a set of investment holdings, and a specific bequest. He withdrew a folded document and set it in front of Eleanor. To his niece, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, now Eleanor Grace Caldwell, directly. Not to the Whitmore family, not to her husband, to her in her name, held in her sole discretion. Eleanor looked at the document without touching it. "How much?" Prentice told her. The number was not enormous. It was not the kind of wealth that changed the scale of everything. But it was substantial enough to represent genuine independence, genuine choice, the kind of financial foundation that meant Eleanor Caldwell would never again be entirely dependent on the goodwill of any arrangement she hadn't initiated. She looked up at Prentice. Did he say why? Prentice reached into the case again and withdrew a letter. A single page, sealed and addressed in handwriting Eleanor didn't recognize. He set it in front of her. He left instructions that this be delivered alongside the legal documents, Prentice said. He wanted you to read it. Eleanor picked up the letter. She broke the seal. She read. The letter was short. 4 paragraphs. Her uncle had written it, apparently, 6 months before his death planned. Deliberate, the act of a man who knew he was running out of time and wanted to use what remained of it correctly. He had watched the Whitmore family from a distance for years, he wrote. He had watched Eleanor, specifically, for the past several, had heard reports from people in the county, had paid attention to what came back to him. He had seen what she was. He had seen what she was made to carry. He had not intervened when he should have, and that was a failure he was trying, imperfectly, to address. You have never needed anyone to believe in you, to do what needed doing, he had written. But I suspect you have needed, at least once, for someone to say clearly, I see you. Not what you manage for others, not what you prevent. I am saying it now, late as it is, the bequest is not charity. It is acknowledgement. It is what you were always owed. Eleanor read the last paragraph twice, then she folded the letter. She put it inside her dress, against her chest, where she could feel the paper. She looked at Prentice. I'll need to review the property documents, she said. Her voice was entirely steady. Can you leave copies? Of course, Prentice said. He left 30 minutes later. Caldwell waited until his footsteps had faded down the hall. Then he said quietly, Are you all right? Eleanor looked at the folded documents on the desk. My family knew he died 6 weeks ago, she said. They didn't tell me. No, they knew about the estate proceedings. They would have been contacted. She paused. They didn't tell me. Eleanor, I'm not devastated, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not surprised and I'm not devastated. She paused again, and her voice, when she continued, was very even and very honest. I'm tired of being the member of that family who is thought of last. I'm tired of it in a way I'm finally allowing myself to actually feel. Caldwell said nothing. He did what she had learned. In 5 months, was one of his most genuine qualities. He gave her silence, when silence was what she needed, without filling it with reassurance she hadn't asked for. She sat with the feeling for a moment, let it exist. Then she took a breath. I'm going to Whitmore House, she said. Today. I'll come with you, he said. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know, he said. I'm coming. The drive to Whitmore House took 40 minutes. They did not speak much. Eleanor sat with the letter against her chest and thought about what she was going to say, and then she stopped thinking about it and decided she would simply say what was true, the way she always did. Her mother met them at the door. Margaret Whitmore had the expression of a woman who has been caught at something and is calculating whether to deny it or explain it. She chose explanation, which was, Eleanor thought, at least the more honest option. "I was going to write," her mother said. "You had 6 weeks," Eleanor said. "It was complicated." "It wasn't," Eleanor said. She walked past her mother into the parlor. Caldwell followed. Her mother closed the door and stood with her hands folded in front of her, and Eleanor turned to face her. "He left the bequest directly to me," Eleanor said. "Not to the family. To me. You knew that, and you didn't tell me." Her mother's composure bent slightly. Your father thought that given the circumstances, it might be worth discussing how the bequest could best be used," Eleanor said. "Silence. You were going to discuss," Eleanor said quietly, "how my inheritance could be used." "By whom, Mother?" Margaret Whitmore looked away, just briefly. But Eleanor had her answer. "Victoria's home," Eleanor said. It was not a question. She had already understood. "She needs support," her mother said, rallying. "She came back with nothing." "The situation with that man, she was deceived, Eleanor. She needs time to recover, and she needs resources." "She does," Eleanor said, "and that's your responsibility and father's." "It is not mine." "I have always had means," Eleanor said. "I have always had the means to manage and plan and produce and solve, and this family has been drawing on those means since I was 16 years old, and nobody, not once, not in all those years, thought to make certain I had something for myself." She paused. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. "My uncle thought of it. A man I barely knew thought of it. I want you to understand what that tells me about the rest of you." Her mother's face crumpled. Not performed genuinely, the way a face crumples when something true hits it. "Eleanor," she said. "I am sorry, I know," Eleanor said. "I believe you." Her father appeared in the doorway of the study, drawn out by the voices, pale and diminished in the way he'd looked ever since the night Victoria's note had been found. He looked at Eleanor and at Caldwell standing steady behind her, and he looked like a man who was seeing clearly for the first time in a long while exactly what he had failed to do. "Eleanor, Papa," she said. Her voice was gentler with him. It had always been gentler with him. He was weaker, and weakness was not a crime, and she had spent too much energy being angry at weak people to sustain it. "I should have told you," he said, "about Gerald, about the estate. I should." His voice broke slightly. "You deserve to know. You deserved everything he left you, and we should have made certain you received it without the family getting in the way." Eleanor looked at her father for a long moment. Then she crossed the room and she embraced him. Briefly, firmly, the way you embrace someone when you're releasing something you've been holding too long. "I know," she said. "It's done now." Victoria came downstairs while they were still in the parlor. She had heard the voices, clearly. She appeared in the doorway with the particular wariness of someone who knows they are the subject of a conversation and is trying to determine the temperature of it before committing to entry. She looked at Eleanor, then at Caldwell. "I didn't know you were coming," she said. "I didn't know about Uncle Gerald until this morning," Eleanor said. "Neither did you, I think." Victoria's expression shifted. "Mother told me yesterday," she said. She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "I didn't ask her to use it, Eleanor. I want you to know that. I know what it looked like, me being here, and the estate, and I didn't ask." Eleanor looked at her. "I believe you," she said. Victoria exhaled. "But I need you to understand something," Eleanor said. "The bequest is mine. I will use it as I decide. I will not be managing the consequences of your choices with it or anyone else's." She paused. "Your choices belong to you now, all of them. The consequences are yours to manage." Victoria looked at her for a long moment. Something in her face was working through something difficult, pride and shame underneath it, and the particular pain of being told the truth by someone who loves you enough not to soften it past recognition. "That's fair," Victoria said quietly. "I know," Eleanor said. She turned to Caldwell. "I'm ready to go home." He nodded. He said brief, courteous goodbyes to her parents. He nodded to Victoria, not cold, not warm. Simply measured. The way he measured most things. They left. On the drive back, the air was sharp and the sky was doing something complicated with clouds and light that kept shifting the mood of the afternoon. Eleanor sat and felt the weight of the morning leaving her, not fully, not all at once, but in the gradual way of things that have been put in their proper place. "You said home," Caldwell said. She looked at him. "In there," he said. "You said you were ready to go home." "You meant Caldwell Manor." She had not thought about it consciously. It had come out of her naturally, unrehearsed, the way things come out when they're simply true. "Yes," she said, "I did." He looked at her with an expression she knew now. The warmth that lived underneath the watchfulness, the thing he had learned, in 5 months, to let her see more fully and more often. "Good," he said. She looked forward through the window at the road. "I'm going to use part of the bequest on the estate," she said. He blinked. "Not as contribution," she said. "As investment. I want a formal stake, legal, documented. I want the records to show that my money and your money built this together." She paused. "I'm not giving it. I'm investing it. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I want to," she said. "I want what is ours to be actually legally documented ours. Not because I don't trust you. Because I know what it means for a woman to have her contributions invisible, and I'm not willing to let that be what history says about me." He looked at her for a long time. "All right," he said. "I'll have the solicitor draw up the documentation." "I'll draft the terms," she said. Something moved across his face. "Of course you will," he said. And this time he did laugh quietly, genuinely, the sound of a man who has stopped being surprised by her and started simply delighting in what she is. She looked at him when he laughed. She thought clearly, without apology, without the caution she'd been carrying around, the feeling like a fence that she loved him. Not the arrangement, not the safety of the life he'd made possible. Him, the man who had looked at her the first day she walked into his study and listened. Who had backed her without hesitation when it cost him something. Who had revised the legal documents when he didn't have to, and told her about it honestly, and let her reaction be whatever it was going to be. She did not say it yet. She was not finished deciding exactly how she wanted to say it. She would say it when she had the right words, which was, she supposed, entirely her. But she held it warm and certain, and entirely hers, and she looked at the road ahead. The county's recalibration happened gradually, and then all at once. These things always do. Social opinion in a place like Virginia in 1816 moved the way rivers move slowly, following the path of least resistance. Until something shifts the landscape, and then the current goes a different direction entirely, and, within a season, it's impossible to remember it ever ran any other way. The news about the Hargrove boundary claim dropped before it ever reached a magistrate, settled by a letter Eleanor had found in a storage box, had traveled. The news about Patterson, the dishonest overseer, had traveled. The news about the field workers' back wages had traveled in the way that matters most, which is person to person, mouth to ear, among people who had actually felt it. And then the news traveled that Gerald Whitmore's estate had been left directly to Eleanor Caldwell, to her, in her name, and that she had gone to Whitmore House and handled the conversation that followed with a directness and firmness that everyone who heard the retelling agreed they could entirely imagine. Constance Hargrove did not call. Eleanor did not expect her to. But Lydia Alcott called, and Frances Webb called, and 3 new women called, women from the edge of the county who had been watching from a distance and had apparently decided the distance was no longer warranted. And one morning in October, Eleanor received a letter from the Richmond Ladies' Charitable Committee asking if she would be willing to consult on the restructuring of their annual fundraising accounts, which had apparently been managed with less rigor than the situation demanded. Then she read the letter twice. Then she went to find Caldwell. He was in the study. He looked up when she walked in and she set the letter on his desk without speaking. He picked it up, he read it, he set it down. "They're asking you for professional advice," he said. "Apparently, the Richmond Ladies Committee." "Yes." He looked at her. 6 months ago you were sent to my door to apologize for your sister's choices. I know, she said. And now the Richmond Ladies Committee is asking for your professional advice. I know, she said again. He looked at her with that expression, the full warmth of it, no watchfulness left in it at all. Just him. Just the thing she had been learning to see more clearly with every week that passed. What will you tell them? He asked. Eleanor thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. I'll tell them yes, she said, and I'll tell them my standard terms. He stood. He came around the desk. He stood close, the deliberate closeness she had learned to recognize and had stopped pretending not to want. Eleanor, he said. Yes, she said. I have something to tell you, he said. She waited. I'm not a man who says things easily, he said. You know that. I know that, she said. So when I say something, I need you to understand that it has been considered, he said. Thoroughly. I would expect nothing less, she said. He looked at her directly. I love you, he said, not the arrangement. Not what you've done for this estate, though what you've done is extraordinary. You. The woman who walked into my house and told me the truth when she had every reason to manage me instead. The woman who has been every day without fail exactly who she is. He paused. I love who you are. The room was very quiet. Eleanor looked at him. I was going to wait, she said, until I had exactly the right words. And he said, I love you, she said. I've known it for a while. I was finding the right moment. This is the moment, he said. Yes, she said. It is. He reached up and took her face in his hands gently, with the particular care of a man who understands that what he's holding matters, and kissed her. Not performed, not formal, real and warm, and certain, and entirely mutual. When they broke apart, Eleanor stood with her hands against his chest and her forehead nearly against his, and thought with the full honesty she gave to everything that she could not have imagined this. Not the love itself. Not this man, this house, this life that had been built out of the wreckage of her sister's choices, and her family's debts, and her own willingness to walk into a room and tell the truth. She had not imagined it, but she had chosen it. Every step of the way she had chosen it. In November, Victoria Whitmore quietly accepted a position as a governess companion to a family in Maryland, a respectable household, arranged through the church minister, entirely of her own initiative. She wrote to Eleanor to tell her. The letter was short and genuine, and asked for nothing. Eleanor wrote back. She said she was glad. She said she wished her well. She meant both things. In December, the Richmond Ladies Committee restructuring was complete. Eleanor's recommended changes had saved them $40 annually and improved their donation tracking sufficiently that 3 new donors had committed support. The committee chair wrote a formal letter of thanks that was, Eleanor noted, addressed to her directly. Not to Caldwell, to her. She put it in the desk drawer where she kept her uncle's letter. And on a cold December evening, the fire in the study throwing warm light across the room, the estate's winter accounts balanced and filed. The year's work laid down, Eleanor sat across from Nathaniel Caldwell and felt the fullness of what her life had become. Not the life she'd expected, not the life anyone would have predicted for the plain sister, the quiet one. The girl who stood at the edges of rooms and managed the things nobody wanted to face. This was a different life, larger, sharper, more entirely hers. She had walked into this house as a substitute and stayed as a choice. She had arrived with nothing to offer but honesty, and had built from that honesty a life that was real in every measure she knew how to apply. Caldwell looked at her across the firelight and said, "What are you thinking?" "That I would choose this again," she said, "knowing everything. Every last thing. So would I," he said. Without hesitation. Eleanor Whitmore Caldwell, who had once been the sister nobody noticed, the daughter nobody worried about, the woman sent to clean up someone else's mess, sat in the life she had built, and loved the man she had chosen, and knew, with the full precision of a woman who had learned to trust her own accounting, that every figure balanced. She had come here with nothing but the truth. It had been, as it turned out, exactly enough.